Hi, welcome. We're standing here in the Frank Lloyd Wright building of the Guggenheim Museum in New York City.
Right now we have on view a Hilma Af Klint exhibition, and we are the people who work on organizing the exhibition.
Right, I'm Tracy Bashkoff, Director of Collections and Senior Curator.
And I'm David Horowitz, Curatorial Assistant.
And we co-curated the Hilma Af Klint Paintings for the Future exhibition that's on view now at the Guggenheim.
Yes. Today we're going to talk about a group of paintings that Hilma Af Klint, a Swedish artist, made in 1907 called the 10 Largest. And they're the first paintings that our visitors will encounter when they come to the museum to see the exhibition.
That's right. So, Hilma Af Klint was a Swedish woman painter, artist, working in the early decades of the 20th century, mainly in Stockholm. And she produced a large body of work. The works that you're seeing in this gallery are part of a larger cycle of work that she did that were called the Paintings for the Temple. And that's a group of work of about 193 works that she did in a period between 1906 and 1915. And you can see many of them situated throughout the museum as you walk through walk through the ramps of the museum.
Yeah. So that group of paintings are notable because they include some very early examples of abstract painting in the West. There aren't a lot of artists who are functioning in that kind of style before then. Kandinsky, Mondrian, Malevich, Kupka, all of those artists that we associate traditionally with the birth of abstraction made their breakthroughs around 1913. And the paintings we see here are from 1907,
so these are quite early, 1907. It's kind of the second year. She starts in 1906 working in this manner, but as you can see from the canvases, she's incorporated some botanical and organic forms, but they are largely abstract compositions. They also contain text and writing within the canvases, which is also quite original for her time period.
Yeah. In addition to the degree of abstraction and the incorporation of different kinds of imagery, these paintings are pretty striking because of their scale. There are some very, very large paintings, and she did call them the 10 largest. And so we can see that they're really an ambitious group. But to make such large paintings, you need a very large studio, and so I think we should talk about how she got that studio.
That's right. So Hilma Af Klint was a trained artist. She went to the Royal Academy of Stockholm. She was one of the first few classes of women artists to be allowed to study at the Academy. And at some point in her work there, she was awarded access to a studio space, which she shared with several other students and was located in a building in the center of the art world of Stockholm. And there we know that she created these very large canvases.
Yeah. Still, I don't think the studio was that large. There's some notes that the women she shared the studio with were distraught about how much space she was taking up with these works, and they weren't sure if it was the right kind of way to be using her energies either.
Right. The studio space no longer exists. The building's been knocked down and replaced. But we can imagine that she probably wasn't able to have all 10 on view at any point. We don't know very much about the process in which she painted these, but there are certain clues that we can learn from in the canvases themselves. And so, for one, the works are actually not canvas. They're actually works on paper that are then mounted on canvas. And so if you look closely at any of these works, one can see the seam that runs up the piece vertically, where two pieces of paper, two sort of long rolls of paper were placed side by side and joined. The paint that she used is tempera paint, and it's rather thinly applied. It doesn't have kind of the impasto, the thickness that one might see in an oil painting. There are areas where the paper kind of shows through and the layers of color show through. And the weight of these, just because of how big they are, would have been so great that they may have ripped under their own accord if she tried to move them, and that's why she herself mounted them on canvas so that they could be moved around the studio.
Yeah.
And probably moved because of the process in which she painted them.
Oh, yes. So we think that there's a possibility that these were painted on the floor. There's a lot of speculation about that because of their pure scale. And there's some other large works, not quite as large as this, that have footprints in them, so that people have thought perhaps these were painted horizontally, which would be a really startling break from a traditional kind of engagement. But these paintings also show signs of drips, which you can see, for instance, in this painting, number 4 here. And those drips suggest that the work was done vertically, so that this is something of an open question. If she did any of the work horizontally, though it's clear that she worked vertically. We can also see in this painting that the composition was really planned before it was executed. You can see evidence of underdrawing in passages such as here, where you see the graphite. And that's not the only way that we see this kind of evidence. There's also many places where we see that she labeled the color to use, and you can still read that. Such as in this painting here, in this area of yellow, you see the Swedish word for yellow. And you see that kind of labeling happening throughout this group of paintings. Hilma Af Klint, in these works that had these works for her had this huge spiritual significance. They're from this larger group called the Paintings from the Temple, and that's really the context in which she wanted to show them was a temple, was in a religious setting, and they were an outgrowth of her spiritual practice, including her channeling. And she made these works in part by channeling. However, we can see in that kind of move that she wasn't in a kind of trance as she was channeling, that she was really using a lot of artistic intentionality and really thinking through how to construct these compositions. She even described that as she made these paintings, she was supposed to think of the spiritual guides that she channeled as standing next to her, not as controlling her.
Right. And the scale of the works, we've been talking about them in terms of the issues in the production of the work, but it also speaks to the significance and the seriousness that she applied to this project that she was engaged in. The other works, the other things that she may have seen of this scale during her lifetime by 1907 were large salon paintings of kind of, perhaps myths and history paintings, and those were often horizontal, but also religious paintings in churches and cathedrals, and these in some way can be spoken about as religious paintings, since they're very much records of her spiritual process and journey. And so really the scale is also significant to her undertaking and to what she wanted to convey with these works. And the subject of these works is also sort of grand as the scale is, and the subject is the cycle of life. And how's that borne out in the paintings?
So the first two blue paintings that we see represent childhood, the beginning of life, and the next two, these two orange works, are youth. The following 4 paintings that are all purple represent adulthood. And these final 2 pink paintings that are somewhat paler represent old age. And, they do kind of track the progression of life of an individual, but in a very specific sense. All of the work in the paintings for the temple are very interested in showing spiritual progression in different ways and how they permeate the world on different levels. And here we can see that kind of journey for an individual. The first painting in the group, it's a really beautiful painting, but it's a very ebullient and even a little bit chaotic compositionally. We have this wonderful orange line that sometimes appears to be graphic, at other times appears to be writing, and is a kind of unique grouping of letters that we don't really see elsewhere in Hilma Af Klint's work or in Swedish. So it suggests this kind of coming into being, that's something that's not quite fully formed yet. By the time we get to the final painting in this in the 10 largest. We have something that's very balanced, very serene. You can kind of feel that sense of uplift, that sense of stability, that sense of knowing yourself spiritually.
So these paintings were never shown during her lifetime. At some point when she moved out of that studio that had some scale to it, she rolled them up and stored them, and they remained stored not just during her lifetime, but for years after. When she dies in 1944, she had left instruction that they were not to be viewed for 20 years after her death. And so they remained with her family and still are with the Hilma Af Klint Foundation in Stockholm today, and remained that way for many years until really the 1980s, the mid-1980s, when they were first shown in the art world context, and she was introduced to the public at that time.
Yeah. Yes, and these works that, as Tracy said, are all still in the collection of the Hilma Af Klint Foundation in Stockholm. This is the first time that the artist has had a major exhibition in the U.S. and that we've seen all 10 of these works
Together
on this continent. So it's very exciting for us. The exhibition is open through April 23rd. And thank you very much for joining us. If you want to leave any comments or questions, please feel free to do so, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to you.